"It's just a garden, Thomas. Let it go." That's what she said, standing in my driveway with her sunglasses pushed high on her forehead and a clipboard wedged under her elbow like a badge of power. Deborah Langley always had that smile, that fake, tight-lipped smile that let you know she wasn't asking, she was telling. Only problem? That garden wasn't just a garden, and I wasn't about to let it go. My name's Thomas Weller. I'm a residential architect, widowed, and I live in the same quiet cul-de-sac my wife and I bought into 15 years ago, back when this neighborhood still had soul. Before the meetings, before the fines, before the paper pushers in pastel suits and fake concerns started deciding how green your lawn could be. But before we go any further, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know which part of the world this story's reaching. And if you care about homeowners standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you're gonna want to see how this ends. Now let me tell you why that garden mattered. My wife Lila loved marigolds, said they looked like fireworks frozen in bloom. Every spring she'd start with a single corner bed by the old wrought iron bench we found at that antique fair in Cedar Grove. The bench wasn't worth much, maybe $20, but it had these tiny vine engravings curling along the legs. She said it reminded her of her grandmother's garden, and that was reason enough to keep it. When cancer took her 3 years ago, I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't sleep in our bed for months, couldn't cook, couldn't think, but I could keep that garden alive. It started with one marigold bed. Then I added tomatoes. Then lavender. She used to rub it on her wrists when she was anxious. I found some old seed packets in her studio and just kept going. It wasn't a garden anymore. It was a living memory. A way to keep her voice around, buried in soil and bloom. So yeah, when Deborah Langley marched up to my door holding a violation notice about unauthorized vegetation, I didn't exactly smile and say thank you. She waved the paper like a priest blessing the damned. "You're violating Section 4B, Thomas. The board agreed it's unkempt, oversized, and draws too many bees." I stared at her, then looked back at the garden. The bees were buzzing like little guardians, floating from bloom to bloom. The lavender patch was in full purple. The marigolds? Exploding orange. I couldn't help myself. "You think this is a problem?" I said. "Then you never knew beauty." She blinked. "This isn't about beauty. It's about standards." No, it was about control. The citations started rolling in, weekly, one for excessive planter height, one for irregular trellis design, another for hose storage non-compliance. Greg Sandin, the HOA vice president and a walking bottle of aftershave, strutted by twice a day now, phone in hand, snapping photos like I was a public menace. I tried talking to my neighbors, but most of them just smiled nervously and backed away. You could smell the fear. The HOA had turned our street into a whisper network. No one wanted to be next. But it wasn't until I found a bright orange citation zip-tied to the bench, Lila's bench, that something in me clicked. It read, "Unregistered yard structure subject to removal." They wanted to erase her, piece by piece. I didn't scream, didn't threaten. I just sat down on that bench, let the sun hit my face, and ran my hand along the old vines etched in the iron. And that's when I made the decision. If they wanted to take something precious from me, I'd find something just as precious to them. And I'd buy it. Not with threats, not with protests, but with paperwork, patience, and a plan. Checkmate doesn't happen in one move. But it starts with one. I didn't touch the bench. Didn't move it, didn't hide it. Didn't even brush the dust off the citation zip-tied to its armrest. I left it exactly where it was, facing east, just how Lila liked it. She used to say mornings looked softer when you faced the sun. I figured if I was going to fight, I might as well let her watch. The very next day, they doubled the citations. This time, it wasn't just unauthorized yard structure, it was a list. 7 items, a printed checklist clipped to my mailbox like a parking ticket. Non-standard garden bed edging. Improper hose storage. Unapproved flora exceeding allowable height. Obstruction of view from neighboring lot. And again, that one that really burned. Excessive bee attraction. They were practically allergic to beauty. I stood there with the list in my hand when Greg Sandin pulled up, vice president of the HOA, self-declared enforcer of order and the kind of guy who wears mirrored sunglasses even on cloudy days. He didn't get out of the car. just rolled the window down and grinned like I was an inside joke he was saving for later. "Thomas," he said, "you've got until the end of the week. We wouldn't want this escalating." He said it like we were equals, like he hadn't been the one who reported me 15 times in 2 months, like I hadn't seen him sneak past my back fence, snapping photos of my sunflowers like they were weapons. I didn't respond. I just turned around, walked back up my porch steps, and shut the door behind me. Then I opened Amazon. Motion sensor camera, discreet, birdhouse casing, overnight delivery. If they were going to play surveillance games, I'd learn the rules. That night, I installed the camera just above the lavender bed. The bees swarmed lazily in the dusk, unbothered. I angled the lens to catch the whole eastern yard bench, flowers, hose, fence line, everything. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft buzz of cicadas outside the window, and remembering the way Lila used to hum while she weeded. I'd give anything to hear it again, but the hum I heard now, it was cold, mechanical. A lawnmower roaring past at 3. I checked the feed at dawn. There he was. Greg, caught clear as day, walking along my fence, stopping at the corner, lifting his phone, flash blinking. He zoomed in on the hose, crouched to photograph the trellis, and then he stepped over, onto my lawn. No badge, no warning, just a man trespassing with a smirk and a Samsung. By afternoon, another notice showed up. Repeat violations, final warning before legal action. Signed in that sharp-angled signature I now knew too well. Deborah Langley. I'd spent my entire career designing homes that felt safe from weather, noise, strangers. Now the threat was coming from inside the fence line, from the people who were supposed to protect the peace. That night, I printed out the photo stills from the camera footage, slipped them into a manila folder, and labeled it Control. Not evidence, not OA, just control. Because that's what this was about. It was never about the garden. Next morning, I walked the folder down to the community center. Deborah was hosting one of her weekly open office hours, sipping tea from a porcelain cup and smiling at everyone like she'd personally built the neighborhood with her bare hands. When she saw me, her lips tightened. "Thomas, here to file another complaint." I placed the folder in front of her. She didn't open it. "You've crossed a line," I said. Her smile twitched. "And which line is that?" "The one between governance and obsession." That got her. Just for a second her eyes flashed, but she recovered fast. She reached into a drawer, pulled out a fresh form, and slid it toward me. "To submit in writing." She thought I'd back down. She didn't know yet. I'd already started drawing new lines, not with seeds and soil, with plans, with leverage, and with patience. Because a garden doesn't bloom in a day, but when it does, it takes over everything. She didn't open the folder. She never did. I watched Deborah slip it under a stack of newsletters, pat it like it was nothing, then move on to smiling at the next couple behind me. 2 retirees asking about shrub height regulations. I left the community center with the sun in my face and grit in my chest. But what got to me wasn't her dismissal. It was the woman sitting beside her. Marta Green, HOA treasurer, mid-50s, gray bob tucked behind one ear, cardigan buttoned tight like armor. She didn't say a word the whole time I was there. Didn't glance at the folder, didn't say hello, just sat there, tapping one finger, soft, rhythmic, against her clipboard like a slow drip in a sink. I remembered her from before all this nonsense. She was one of Lila's garden club friends. They used to swap seed packets and herbal tea recipes. Lila liked her, said she had sad eyes but a warm laugh. But today, Marta wouldn't look at me. That night, I sat on the bench under the marigold canopy and stared at the folder. It still smelled faintly of the vanilla candle I used to keep in Lila's study. I had labeled it Control, but maybe that was too simple, too clean. Control sounded like something you could break with facts. This was more than that. This was fear. The next HOA meeting was in 2 days. I circled the date on the calendar, and then I pulled out a fresh notebook, black cover, spiral bound, and started documenting everything, every citation, every photo, every date and time Greg strolled by with his smug camera, every phrase Deborah used. Lila always said people reveal themselves in repetition. Their patterns give them away. Marta had a pattern too. At the meeting, I sat near the back, surrounded by folding chairs and the fake fern Deborah insisted made the room more inviting. She opened with her usual legalese, a sing-song blend of authority and threat. As stated under Bylaw 9C, personal landscaping modifications must align with visual continuity standards. I barely listened. I watched Marta. She was quiet as always, head tilted slightly downward, but every time Deborah said the word violation, Marta's jaw twitched. Not much, just a subtle clench. When Greg made a snide joke about organic chaos, she shifted in her seat. Fingernails drummed against the metal armrest. Quiet, but rapid now. She wasn't comfortable, she wasn't indifferent, she was trapped. I waited until the break. Everyone filed out into the hallway to grab sugar cookies and decaf. I stayed seated. So did Marta. Slowly, I stood, walked down the aisle and took the chair next to hers. She didn't move. "You know it's not just a garden," I said, voice low. Still no response. "I saw you that day. After Lila's funeral. You left wildflower seeds on our porch. You remember?" Her fingers stopped tapping. "You didn't sign the note, but I knew it was you. Lila told me how much you loved her lavender patch." For the first time in 3 years, Marta looked me in the eye. They were red-rimmed. "Wet. I don't want to be here anymore," she whispered. "Then don't be." She swallowed, her hands tightened in her lap. "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple. Tell the truth." Her gaze darted toward the hallway. Deborah's heels clicked closer. She was coming back. Marta rose suddenly, wiping her palms on her skirt. Before she walked away, she leaned slightly toward me. "There's a box," she said. "Bottom drawer, board archives. I never signed off on the removal notice, but someone else did. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where the archives were kept. And now, I had a thread to pull. I didn't sleep that night. Marta's words wouldn't leave me. There's a box." She hadn't said what was in it, but I knew. Or rather, I hoped, because if there was a paper trail, a missing signature, a forged name, anything, I could turn this whole thing upside down. But that was going to take timing. The HOA office wasn't some sleek corporate setup. It was a converted guest room in the back of Deborah Langley's house. Neutral carpets, faded motivational posters, and 2 locked file cabinets that hadn't seen the light of day since Obama's first term. I'd need an excuse to get in, and just as I started planning one, they beat me to the punch. The next morning, I stepped outside with my coffee and stopped cold. My garden was destroyed. The marigolds gone. The lavender uprooted, soil ripped and scattered like a battlefield. Raised beds snapped at the corners, wood splintered, and the iron bench was turned on its side, with one leg bent. First, I didn't move. I just stood there, mug in hand, birds chirping like nothing had happened. Then I saw it. A slip of paper, folded, stuffed under a broken trellis. I picked it up. In thick marker, final warning, let it go. No signature, no HOA logo, just sharp, angry handwriting and a stench of cowardice. Took a breath, walked back inside, set my mug down, and went to the cabinet in Lila's old studio. There was a tin box on the bottom shelf, vintage, red with yellow roses. Lila used to keep string and seed packets in it. I hadn't opened it in years, but I remembered something she said when we first moved in. "If anyone ever tries to tell you what your yard should look like, show them this." I never knew what she meant. I assumed it was a joke. But inside the box, folded maps, receipts, photocopies of early Briarwood zoning layouts, back when the parkland and private plots were all tied up in a trust managed by her mother's law firm. A trust I'd never seen mentioned in any HOA handbook. It was like finding buried treasure in a box of twine. But before I could dive deeper, my phone pinged. Security cam alert. I opened the feed. Greg, again. But this time, he wasn't just skulking by, he was on my property. Broad daylight, standing where the tomatoes used to be, arms crossed like he owned the place. I stepped outside, calm, controlled. "You want to explain this?" I asked, gesturing to the wreckage. He tilted his head. "Landscaping accident? Is that what we're calling trespassing now?" He smirked. "Board voted. non-compliant vegetation. We have the right to remove hazards. I stepped closer, keeping my voice even. And what hazard did the marigold pose, Greg? Allergies? Too cheerful for the neighborhood vibe. He didn't answer, just turned and walked away. No apology, no shame. I spent the rest of the day salvaging what I could, replanting roots, sweeping broken wood, and when the sun went down, I went back inside and pulled out a different kind of tool, my laptop. Drafted a formal request to inspect HOA meeting records, specifically decisions tied to landscaping enforcement, budget reallocations, and voting quorums over the past 3 years. I knew they'd stall. That was fine, because while they tried to delay me with bureaucracy, I had a new plan: get into that archive room, legally, quietly, and find the document Marta hinted at. But even as I typed, something stuck in my throat, not just anger, grief, because it wasn't just flowers they trampled. It was memory. Ritual, the last living pieces of someone they never knew, but who made this house a home. They wanted me to let it go. I wasn't going to let it fade. The next morning, I woke to silence. No buzzing bees, no smell of lavender drifting in through the open window. Just the kind of silence that hangs heavy, like the pause before a verdict. The garden was still raw from the vandalism. I hadn't touched the damage yet. I left it there, on full display, a scar they couldn't pretend didn't exist. I took one look at the mess, buttoned up my jacket, and headed straight to Deborah's house. Every Tuesday, from 10 to noon, her HOA office opened for resident concerns. Today, I wasn't going to raise one. I was going to dig. Her husband, Alan, greeted me at the door with his usual confused smile and offered me weak coffee in a styrofoam cup. He seemed harmless enough, just a man who married the wrong woman and learned to keep his head down. I stepped inside. Same beige walls, same artificial lemon air freshener, same ticking grandfather clock in the corner, just loud enough to be annoying. "Deborah's in the study," Alan said. "Board stuff." I nodded and made my way down the short hall. The study door was open. Deborah sat at her desk, typing. She looked up, unimpressed. "Thomas," she said flatly, "more complaints?" "No," I said, "just here to follow up on that inspection request I submitted. Figured I'd see how far down the pile it's been buried." She gestured to a stack of folders on the desk. "Somewhere between potluck sign-ups and dog leash violations. We're getting to it." I nodded, pretending not to notice her sarcasm. "Mind if I use the restroom?" She waved me off without looking. "Second door on the right." I walked down the hall, but didn't stop at the bathroom. I went further, to the door with the keypad lock. The HOA records room, also known as the converted guest bedroom where they kept all archived HOA documents. And it wasn't locked. Either Deborah had grown careless or Marta had planned this better than I thought. Inside, the light was dim. The blinds were half closed, letting in faint lines of morning sun. The room smelled like old paper and something synthetic, file folders, dust, and lemon-scented air freshener fighting a losing battle. There were 2 tall metal file cabinets, a folding table, and an old printer covered in spiderwebs. I moved fast but deliberate, pulling open the bottom drawer of the cabinet nearest the door. There it was. A long white box labeled in marker, HOA Meeting Minutes 2007 to 2021. I lifted it out and placed it on the table. The lid creaked as I opened it. Inside, folders, loose papers, and a few manila envelopes rubber-banded together. Most of it was junk, attendance sheets, budget drafts, duplicate memos. But then I saw it. A yellow, legal-sized folder labeled Park Use Title History. My pulse kicked up. I flipped it open and scanned the first few pages. Land transfer documents, maintenance agreements, and then a trust deed dated 1999. It was signed by Lila's mother. And beneath that, a stamped amendment, handwritten in the margins. Trustee rights transfer to Lila R. Weller upon marriage and occupancy. See 2007 revision. That revision was stapled to the back. It named Lila and me co-beneficiaries. We had ownership rights over the parkland, not the HOA. That's why Marta looked so haunted. Someone buried this, and now I had it. I snapped a photo of every page, careful not to make noise. The printer creaked behind me as it cooled from inactivity, but the rest of the room was dead still. Then, the clock chimed noon. Loud, echoing, I froze. Footsteps. "Alan?" Deborah's voice. "Can you check what's taking him so long?" I shut the folder, slid everything back in the box, and replaced it in the drawer. I stepped into the hallway just as Alan turned the corner. "There you are," he said, startled. "Sorry," I said, patting my stomach. "Bad chili last night." He grimaced. "Say no more." I walked out with a nod and a smile and a dozen photos that would burn their lies to the ground. I didn't go home right away. After slipping out of Deborah's house, I drove straight to Briarwood Park. Just parked at the edge and stared at it through the windshield like it was the first time I'd ever seen it. Kids were swinging, a few neighbors were walking dogs along the winding trail. Everything looked normal, neat, controlled. But I knew something now that they didn't. That park belonged to Lila, and now, by law, to me. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, the midday sun creeping across the dashboard, burning the truth into my chest like a brand. They had fined me, threatened me, destroyed my garden, and the whole time they were sitting on land they had no right to touch. Lila knew. That tin box in her studio, the zoning maps, the trust language, it wasn't just nostalgia. She knew this war would come one day. And she left me the ammunition to win it. When I got home, the scent of torn soil still lingered in the air. The garden was a wreck, but something caught my eye. The bench. It hadn't been broken after all. The leg was bent, but it hadn't snapped. I flipped it upright and pressed down, still solid. The vines carved into its ironwork were dirt-streaked but unscarred. I wiped them clean with my sleeve. And that's when it hit me. They wanted me to think everything was ruined. But this was still standing, just like me. Inside, I laid out the photos I'd taken from the archive. Page by page, I made copies, labeled them by year, highlighted trustee signatures, and circled Deborah's name where it appeared. Only after the amendment had already named me and Lila as beneficiaries. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Tommy Weller," came the voice on the other end. "It's been a minute." "Too long, Carla," I said. "Still doing property litigation?" "Still bored of it, yeah. Why?" "Because I've got a case involving a buried trust, a misused park, and the world's most power-hungry HOA president." Her laugh cut through like a blade. "Say no more. Come by tomorrow, bring coffee." I hung up and turned back to the bench out the window. A single marigold had somehow survived, tucked in the corner behind a cracked stepping stone. It leaned sideways, petals curled, but it held its color, blazing orange. Just like Lila wanted. That evening I walked back to the community center, not for a meeting, just to think. The lights were off, the windows dark, but as I stood there staring at the glass door, someone stepped out of the shadows. Marta. Her sweater was draped over her arm and she looked like she'd been crying. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. It was never theirs. I wanted to speak up back then, I really did, but Deborah, she always said we'd lose the park if we didn't simplify the paperwork, and no one questioned her. She convinced you to erase Lila's family trust. She convinced us all it didn't matter, but when I saw your garden torn up, she stopped, voice trembling. That's not the neighborhood we built. That's not who we were supposed to be. I looked at her, really looked. For the first time since this all began, she looked like someone carrying weight that didn't belong to her. "You still have a chance to make it right," I said. Marta reached into her purse and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "This is a list of every meeting where we used the park fund to pay for legal expenses. Deborah claimed it was for beautification. It wasn't. I took it from her gently. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, I started drafting something new, not a complaint, not a protest. A plan. I didn't rush. When you've got something explosive, something true, you don't shout it from the rooftops. You wait, you breathe, you pick your moment. That's what Lila taught me every spring. Let the roots settle before the bloom. So I let them think I was licking my wounds. While they walked past my damaged garden with smug little nods, I was in the background with Carla, drafting affidavits, organizing ownership filings, and preparing something they'd never see coming. But I needed one more thing: proof of intent. It wasn't enough to own the trust. I had to prove they knew it and buried it anyway. And if there was one thing Deborah Langley couldn't resist, it was the sound of her own voice, which meant I needed a conversation. Planted and recorded. The next HOA meeting was in 2 days. I knew Deborah would hold her usual pre-meeting prep in the lounge behind the community center. She always met with Greg and Marta, reviewed the agenda, sipped her awful licorice tea, and spun her version of neighborhood improvement. That was my window. I showed up late on purpose, dressed just slightly rumpled like I hadn't slept, sat 2 rows from the front instead of my usual spot in back, watched her eyes clock me and smile like she'd already won. When the meeting ended, I lingered. People trickled out and I made my way down the hall until I reached the lounge door. It was cracked open, voices inside. I pressed my phone into my pocket, voice memo recording. "He's backing off," Greg was saying. "You saw his yard. He's got nothing left." "You'll quit soon enough," Deborah replied. "They always do. Besides, we had to take the park. That trust was ancient, outdated. Technically, we never had to recognize it." "But it still exists," Marta said, voice tight. Deborah's tone sharpened. "It exists in theory, not in practice. You know how long I've been cleaning up this place? People don't read bylaws. They just want manicured grass and no drama." "And if someone finds the paperwork?" Greg asked. There was a pause. "Then we deny everything," she said flatly. "They won't have anything solid. Lila's gone. No one remembers the signatures. And Thomas, he's just angry. That's not evidence. That's noise." I hit stop. It was enough. I turned and walked out of the building like I was going for a stroll, my heartbeat steady, the phone heavy in my pocket. The next day, I met Carla in her office. She listened to the audio twice, stone-faced, then turned to me and said, "We're going for the jugular." I smiled. Good. She started drafting the complaint. Fraud, malfeasance, misuse of community funds, trust breach. We bundled the archived documents, the meeting minutes Marta gave me, and now the audio, the missing link. But I wasn't done. That evening I returned to the garden. The broken raised beds were still there, but I didn't move them. I left them jagged, open, honest. Instead, I took the bench, still sturdy after everything, and moved it to face the park, right near the fence line. It was a message: I'm watching now. And I wasn't alone. Marta came by with a thermos of chamomile and sat beside me without saying a word. She looked thinner, lighter. "I used to love this neighborhood," she finally said. "Now I can't even look at my own house without hearing her voice in my head." "She's gonna hear yours soon," I said. She glanced at the park where a few parents were packing up strollers. "Are we really going to take it from them?" "We're not taking anything," I said. "We're just taking it back." And for the first time in a long while, the silence felt good. The silence didn't last long. 2 days after the recording, Deborah sent out a mass email to the neighborhood titled "Preserving Order in Briarwood." It was 5 paragraphs of passive-aggressive sunshine. Phrases like community values, unified aesthetics, and a deeply veiled jab about residents who choose to weaponize nostalgia. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. Everyone knew who she meant. That evening, while trimming the one surviving marigold near the bench, I spotted Greg pacing near the community notice board, whispering into his phone. His movements were sharp, anxious. He wasn't just enforcing rules anymore. He was circling a sinking ship. I had no intention of slowing down. Carla filed the complaint the next morning. Every document was numbered, cross-referenced, signed, and sealed. We didn't send it to Deborah. We sent it straight to the city land registrar, the county property records office, and, just for good measure, a copy to the state HOA oversight division, and one to Channel 7's investigative desk labeled Confidential Trust Dispute and HOA Abuse of Power. I didn't need to be loud, I just needed to be thorough. By the time Deborah got wind of it, the dominoes were already mid-fall. I heard about it from Marta, who called me in a breathless whisper from the community center. She's in the office right now, screaming at someone on speakerphone. Said the park's title history got flagged in a database audit. What did she say, exactly? Then it'll be a disaster if it reaches a judge. I smiled. Perfect. That same afternoon, I drove to City Hall. Not to fight, just to listen. The clerk there, a tired-looking woman with a caffeine dependency and a sharp eye for red flags, tapped the folder Carla had mailed in. "You're Thomas Weller?" she asked. "I am." She nodded. "We received this yesterday. Your name's on the trust deed as successor trustee. And that means?" "It means the HOA never had full claim to that parcel of land, not legally. If this gets confirmed by the Board of Records next week, the park title reverts." "To me," I said. "To you," she confirmed, sealing the file. On the way home, I stopped by a small print shop and ordered something simple. A wood sign, nothing flashy. Marigold Grove Private Trust Property. Underneath, by appointment only. I didn't hang it yet. I wasn't ready for the grand reveal. No, this needed precision. Back in the neighborhood, I noticed something unusual. People were starting to talk again. Real conversations, no hushed whispers, no side glances. One woman, Trina, a mother of two with a stroller and a nervous smile, actually stopped me at the edge of my walkway. "I heard what they did to your garden," she said. "It was wrong." I blinked. "You're the first person to say that out loud." I didn't know how bad it got until Marta showed me the photos. "And the documents?" "Marta showed you?" She nodded. She's tired of being quiet. That night I saw something I hadn't seen since Lila passed. Neighbors sitting out on porches. Kids playing past dusk. The HOA presence wasn't gone, but it was fading, like smoke after a storm. Still, I kept my plan close, because the finale was coming, and I wanted it to land like thunder. At the bench, I sat with the new sign propped against my legs. The marigold beside it had straightened again, still small, still weathered, but standing. And I knew exactly what to do next. I waited until the park was empty. Late afternoon, sun low, wind light. Deborah had just left the community center, purse clenched tight under her arm, jaw set in that silent snarl she wore whenever she felt control slipping. Perfect timing. I walked across the grass, my grass now, with the sign tucked under my arm and a hammer in my back pocket. Every step felt heavier than it should, not from nerves, from meaning. I was walking through the space Lila's mother had protected, the space Lila wanted to restore, and the space Deborah tried to erase. I planted the sign just past the swing set. Marigold Grove, Private Trust Property. But then I left it there. No announcement, no social post, no neighborhood alert. I just walked home. The neighborhood exploded before sundown. By 6 p.m., my phone had 6 missed calls and a dozen texts. One was from Marta. She saw it. Another from Trina. "Greg's losing it. Just tried to take it down, but 2 dads stopped him." I didn't reply. I just sat on the bench with my tea, watching the garden, waiting. At 6:42, Deborah came storming down the sidewalk. Not walking, storming. Greg trailed behind her like a flustered intern who'd lost the presentation notes. She didn't stop at the sign. She didn't even look at the marigolds. She came straight to my porch. "You think this is funny?" she snapped, "posting fake signage on public property?" I took a slow sip of my tea. "It's not public anymore. It belongs to the HOA." "No," I said calmly, "it doesn't. It hasn't since 1999. You just hoped no one would dig deep enough to find the trust." Greg stepped in, voice tight. "You're bluffing." "I'm not, but if you'd like to test that theory, I suggest you call your lawyer first." Deborah's lips curled, but I saw the flicker of doubt behind her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't sure, and uncertainty was all I needed. "What do you want?" she hissed. "Nothing," I said. "I already have what I need." She turned without another word and walked away, but Greg lingered a beat longer. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "No," I said, "you will." By morning, someone had taken a picture of the sign and posted it in the neighborhood Facebook group. The thread exploded. Dozens of comments, arguments, theories. And then someone asked the golden question. "Wait, who owns the park now?" And all I had to do was reply with one sentence. "County records show it's held in private trust by Thomas and Lila Weller." That was it. The illusion cracked. That same afternoon, I received an envelope from Deborah. Inside was a formal notice: cease and desist park signage or face legal action. I scanned it, laughed quietly, and sent it to Carla, who responded 2 minutes later with, Cute, I'll frame it. But the most telling moment came at dusk. I was sitting at the bench again, new marigolds now planted along the fence, when I saw 3 board members walking the trail. Not Deborah, not Greg, the quieter ones. They stopped at the sign, stared, whispered, and then one of them, Janet, I think, nodded slowly as if a truth she'd been resisting had finally settled in her bones. They didn't speak to me. They didn't need to. Because word was spreading. This place wasn't theirs anymore. It never was. And I was done asking for permission. 2 days passed. No new citations, no sidewalk meetings, no passive-aggressive emails about neighborhood standards. It was like Deborah had gone silent, pulled the cord on her little machine and disappeared into the fog. But the neighborhood hadn't stopped moving. If anything, it was finally waking up. I spent the morning hauling fresh soil into the raised beds. The ones they tried to break were rebuilt better, fir wood this time, lined, anchored, and right in the center, facing the marigolds, I placed a plaque on the bench. In memory of Lila R. Weller, let beauty grow where power once ruled. That afternoon, I posted one more message to the HOA message board. Just text, no drama. As of today, access to Marigold Grove will be managed privately. Families are welcome. Organized events or group use will require reservation. All revenue will be used to restore the garden and maintain the grounds. T. Weller, trustee. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a boast. It was just logistics. And that's when it began. The payback. That weekend, Deborah's granddaughter had a birthday party. Balloons, picnic tables, rented clown, the whole production. They'd set up in the park by noon, completely ignoring the sign, assuming it meant nothing. I sent a message, a polite typed invoice. Event use of Marigold Grove unregistered. Please remit via Zelle or check to Weller Trust Fund. Attached, photo of the event setup, time-stamped. Deborah never responded, but 2 hours later, Greg stormed up to my door, red in the face, fists balled like a sitcom cop. "You can't charge us to use the park," he spat. "I'm not charging you," I said calmly. "I'm charging your president." "You don't own it." "I do. I've filed the trust, Carla's team filed the deed claim, and every document is public. You're welcome to take me to court. Just remember who has the original trust, with your president's signature denying its existence." He stared at me, jaw twitching, rage boiling, but no comeback. "I'll expect payment by Tuesday," I added, "or I'll be happy to forward the violation to the county clerk. Would be a shame to start a lien over a clown." He left. The next day, the check arrived, signed by Deborah herself. It was poetic, sharp, black ink, no note, no insult, just a check for $350. 0 cents. Made out to the very trust she tried to erase. And once that happened, the dominoes didn't just fall, they collapsed. People started reaching out, not to complain, but to book time, to walk, to garden, to ask about the flowers, the soil, the lavender seeds. The very space that had been patrolled and weaponized was now, finally, being used the way Lila wanted. Even Marta came back. She wore gardening gloves and brought clippings from her yard, mint, thyme, lemon balm. We replanted the corners together, quiet at first, then laughing like we used to when the world felt less heavy. "You really did it," she said, kneeling in the dirt. "No," I said, "we did." Greg resigned that week. No press, no post, just vanished. The HOA page removed his name from the board roster like it had always been blank. But Deborah, she wasn't done yet. A notice went out for a mandatory board review session, closed to residents, no minutes published. But I had ears everywhere now. Janet texted me a photo. It was Deborah at the head of the table, red-faced, clutching a binder, surrounded by board members with arms folded and eyebrows raised. She wasn't leading anymore. She was defending herself. And the most satisfying part? I didn't even have to be in the room. The hearing wasn't held in a courtroom. It was held in the Briarwood Community Hall, under fluorescent lights that flickered like they couldn't stand the tension either. Folding chairs lined the walls. A borrowed lectern stood up front. And behind it, the entire HOA board, seated like they were about to announce a school bake sale instead of face the mess they'd spent years sweeping under ornamental rugs. But this wasn't for cookies. This was for accountability. Deborah sat dead center. Her face wore the same expression she always wore when she couldn't control the room, neutral, tight-lipped, and twitching just behind the eyes. Carla sat to my right, briefcase open. Marta sat to my left, arms folded, her back straight. And behind us, neighbors, dozens of them. People who used to cross the street to avoid being seen talking to me, now sitting silently, watching. The chairperson for the oversight review, a city-appointed official with silver glasses and a folder full of damning evidence, cleared her throat. We're here to review recent allegations of property misrepresentation, unauthorized fines, and the illegal suppression of a recorded land trust. Mr. Weller, would you like to speak first? I didn't look at Deborah. I looked at the crowd. Then I stepped forward. I'm not here to tear down anyone, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm here because someone tried to tear down everything my wife built. A woman who spent her life creating something beautiful in a neighborhood that used to value neighbors more than fences. I turned, held up the photo. Lila, kneeling in the garden, dirt on her knees, smile wide. This trust was signed in 1999. It granted legal stewardship of the park to Lila R. Weller. And now, to me. That's not theory. That's recorded fact. The clerk nodded, confirming. Deborah didn't flinch. I held up the next sheet. This, I tapped the transcript, is a recording from a private HOA planning session in which President Langley admits to intentionally burying the trust and misleading the board. Gasps rippled through the room. I set the paper down. I don't want vengeance. I want honesty. I want this neighborhood to remember who it was before power became a weapon. Carla stood next and laid out every form, every misused line item, every check signed from the so-called Park Beautification Fund that instead went to legal fees, surveillance tools, and selectively enforced citations. When she finished, you could hear a pin drop. Then they let Deborah speak. She stood, but slower than usual, like the chair had taken something from her spine. Her voice, cold, rehearsed. I acted in the interest of maintaining order. The trust was outdated. Mr. Weller has chosen to create a spectacle out of an administrative oversight. That was her whole defense? A neighborhood's betrayal called an oversight. The city official looked unimpressed. Miss Langley, you denied the existence of a trust that had been legally registered. You collected HOA dues and issued citations on land you had no jurisdiction over. That's not oversight. That's deception. Someone in the back clapped. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to start the others. Soon, the room echoed with applause, quiet, firm, rising. Deborah didn't sit back down. She just stood there, frozen, as if no one clapping made any sense. He was voted out within minutes. Not debated, not defended. Removed? Marta was asked to temporarily assume board presidency until a full re-election could be held. She declined at first, then glanced at me. I'll do it, she said, but this time we follow every rule, especially the human ones. When we stepped outside, the sun was setting behind Marigold Grove. I looked across the street, and for the first time in months, Deborah's house had no porch light on, just dark windows. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done, and that felt better. The porch was quiet again. Not silent like before, not heavy or anxious, just peaceful. You could hear the wind move through the lavender stalks, the low hum of bees back at work, and the occasional laughter of kids from the park across the street. My park. They called it Marigold Grove now, officially. The county approved the name change 2 days after the vote. I didn't request it. Marta did. Said it felt like the right tribute, not just to Lila, but to what that place represented. Growth that outlasts the hands trying to tear it down. I walked the path that evening, past the rebuilt trellises and newly planted wildflowers. A few of the neighbors had donated bulbs. Even Trina's kids painted signs for the planters, Butterfly Cafe and Weller's Wild Corner. For the first time in years, the community wasn't just living here. They were building something again. I reached the bench, Lila's bench. Still sturdy, still facing east. The plaque caught the fading light just right. I ran my hand along the top rail, feeling the cool metal under my fingertips, the faint indent of those curling vine engravings she'd loved so much. And then I heard footsteps. Marta approached slowly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Mint and chamomile," she said, offering one. "You remembered," I smiled. She sat beside me, exhaling with the kind of relief that comes after finally telling the truth. "Deborah moved out," she said. "Greg too. Rumor is they're trying to join the HOA board in Oak Ridge." "God help Oak Ridge," I muttered. We laughed, and for a long while we just sat there, sipping tea and watching the light shift. "I almost didn't say anything, you know," she said quietly. "I almost kept quiet forever." "I know." But watching them tear up the garden, I couldn't do it. Not after what this place meant to her. And to you. I nodded. Sometimes it takes someone else's cruelty to remind us of our own courage. She looked at me. "Are you going to keep managing the park?" "I'll maintain it. But the community can have it, under the trust, everyone's welcome, as long as they bring respect." A breeze rolled through. The marigolds leaned, but didn't break. Before she left, Marta said something I'll never forget. "You didn't just save a garden, Tom. You gave us our voice back." And maybe that was true, but as I sat alone a little longer, I realized something else. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about preserving what matters, the spaces, the names, the beauty that tells us we belong. Lila never fought for attention, she just planted things. She let the flowers do the talking. My coffee, now I do the same. As the last sunlight caught the top of the sign and the bench, I leaned back and whispered, "Let beauty grow where power once ruled." And it did. It still does. Have you ever had to stand up to an HOA or fight for your family's legacy? Tell me where you're watching from and share your story in the comments. Your voice matters, and trust me, you're not alone. Let's reclaim what's ours, 1 yard at a time.